Okay, looks like we are live. I am so excited to be interviewing today one of my favorite collaborators and a little bit of an idol of mine, someone who's literally wrote the book on innovation, and she's
Uh,
going to be sharing some ideas with us today. We have some visuals and slides that we're going to share as we go through. You can find all this information and more on the Well Living Lab website, but we won't have a way to share it with you at the end of today. So pay attention and stick with us. There's going to be a lot of great content shared with Barb. Hey, Barb, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Paige. Thanks so much. And I really want to thank Michael and Bethany and the entire conference for this awesome opportunity. I'm very pleased to be with you. Thank you.
Well, we know that you're doing amazing work, and we are so grateful for you to be generous with your time with us today. So we'll get going. You've been with the Mayo Clinic for over 20 years, and you've created a lot of change during that time. And so I wondered if you could share a little bit with us about how the Well Living Lab got started.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I had the great opportunity to serve for about 20 years at Mayo Clinic in a number of different roles. The last role was almost 10 years in helping to build innovation. And it was really in that role. And so my role as the Senior Director of Innovation was helping Mayo Clinic think a lot about transforming the experience and delivery of health and healthcare, and always looking for partners and opportunities to accelerate our pace, knowing that if we're going to transform anything, we're not going to do that alone. So it was really along the way that I met the Shala brothers from Delos, and they had this really big idea with how do we combine real estate as the world's largest asset class with the fastest growing movement, health and well-being. And it was really a dream at that time to say, could we think about Delos in the building science and Mayo Clinic with expertise in the health science and bring things together. So my role for some time was to try to work through that opportunity and convince the Mayo Clinic board that this would be a great idea to bring the Well Living Lab online. So
And
that's what happened, and that's the background.
and those bright ideas caught on and caught some recognition, right? And there was some of those partnerships generated a lot of attention. I know partnerships was something really important to you that you've taken forward. Can you talk to me a little bit about what made it so special?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when we imagine a Mayo Clinic, been around for about 160 years, really, and for many years now, Mayo Clinic has received the top hospital and healthcare system in the country from U.S. News and World Report. So 160 years old, a not-for-profit, coming together with an organization like Delos. And when I first met that company, I believe they had about 5 employees, and now well over 200. So if you can imagine 2 organizations like that coming together that really don't fit together. And with the slide you're showing here, Paige, it's something I'm really proud of. So Mayo Clinic had won the Edison Award before, just for Mayo Clinic in different categories. But Mayo Clinic had never partnered together with another organization. So it was Mayo Clinic and Delos coming together, receiving the Edison Award in Disruptive Innovation for the Well Living Lab. So that was a really exciting day.
That's incredible. And the work continues on. And I've actually had the great pleasure of being able to see the lab in person when we can do these things in person once upon a time. And it was so interesting to walk into something. I think of a laboratory and I think of, mad scientists and smoke coming out of a beaker somewhere. It was so normal. Can you talk to me a little bit about the space itself?
Sure.
Now that the partnership is up and running, the space itself, what makes it sort of special and what may not be apparent to the naked eye?
Well, what's really special is we're located adjacent to Mayo Clinic. So that was really by design. That made a lot of sense to us because all of our research infrastructure is Mayo Clinic. So our studies go through something called the IRB, the Institutional Review Board. We recruit human subjects for all of our studies. So the importance of putting people right in the middle as we think about the built environment and how we're trying to, in our mission, transform human health and well-being in the indoor environment. So that all became really important in terms of the location of the lab itself. And as you can see here, and I encourage people, if you have an interest in learning more, to go out to our website and take the virtual tour, or as things open up in the future, I'll love to be your host and provide a tour in person. But this gives you an idea of the different environments in the lab, really built out as simulated environments that we can change based on the design of the studies that we're conducting. So it's really about humans, it's really about people, it's really about the technology of the environment and adjacent to the Mayo Clinic campus that provides a lot of benefits.
And it's a massive topic, you know, what you've tried to tackle here. Your lab can reconfigure, and you have many construction projects over the course of a study or even a year of studies where you reconfigure the lab for different settings, you know, office or living or other. How did you organize such a broad topic? And you're even talking about some of the interstitial spaces, some walkways or elevators. How are you tackling the built world and human health?
So the slide you're sharing here is really our research roadmap, and we're really in sort of a V2. In the early years, it was about, you know, building the lab, starting to build the team, the relationships. We have something called the Scientific Advisory Council, just brilliant scientists that help with our overall research strategy and such. A Well Living Lab Alliance that I hope I have a chance to talk about in a little more detail. So all those things happen in the beginning. Now we say we're in sort of a V2, and this roadmap provides a lens into that. So our environments are really about the healthy office, the healthy home, and healthy communities. We've been most focused in the healthy office kind of setting. And we really use this whole, you know, grounding around our mission and our values and this idea of how do we think about the overall sort of longitude of health over a person's life as we think about these opportunities. Again, all of the places where they live, where they work, there they play. And given that we spend over 90% of our time inside, sadly, there's a lot of opportunity to think about intervention and solutions.
And maybe even more than 95%, it feels like this year alone.
Yeah,
We're talking about that. And
right.
One thing as I'm listening to you speak of the work that you're doing, the words like relationship and partnership and human and person come up more often than I ever thought they would in hard sciences. And so you're taking a unique sort of human-centered approach to this innovation. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your customer, who might not be who we think it is initially, and just the human power behind what you've built.
Absolutely, thanks. That's a great question. So again, the mission is around transforming human health and well-being in the indoor environment. There are a lot of collaborators and partners as we think about such a impactful mission that we can't do that alone. So those strategies about how we come together to try to impact all of this is very important. But it's really about the person right in the middle of all of this. It's so important. It's something that we were building in the work of innovation at Mayo Clinic. A good friend of mine is Tim Brown, who was the CEO of IDEO for many, many years. This is actually a framework that we borrowed really from IDEO that others use. So this idea of what's desirable, viable, and possible, when we think about things, it's what's desirable. I mean, what makes the Well Living Lab unique? We have brilliant scientists and technologists and project management and all kinds of amazing people. We have leaders that come from Mayo Clinic, but it's really what does science need us to do? So there are lots of things that have been done. There are things that have not been done. There are unanswered questions. There are things that need to be validated. So trying to really anchor things around the scientific exploration is very important. Then when we think about what's viable, it's really, how can we do that? When we think about the assets of Delos, of Mayo Clinic, and our partnering organizations. And then with everything, you know, what's really possible? And now with technology, it feels like anything's possible. But it's really how those pieces come together. But yes, the human-centered part of all of this, to put people in the middle, is very, very core to our overall strategy. And I would just say about that, it's really this idea of having, you know, a design mind to this. I think it's thinking about, you know, what are the problems the problem finding before the problem solving. So how do we understand the problem? And for us, there's a lot of discovery around that before we just solve it. So we can't do our research really, really fast as we're looking at the complexity of how we approach our work. But I think this whole thing about what we're doing together here, and I'm so honored to be here with this broader community of real estate professionals and technologists and others. You know, it's really how we're coming together to design our services and our office buildings and our products to meet the needs of people and understanding who they are and keeping them very much in the middle of what we're trying to uncover and learn.
And some of your people are the most brilliant minds, I would say, in the country, if not even broader. You, at the start of the year, I think you had 8 scientists on your team, with about 10 published research publications and about 15 studies either in the works or completed. And I know it takes time to sort of get those out the door. In the longitude of the existence of the lab, what was one of the most surprising things that you found in the research, in the studies that you're performing to add to science and you?
You know, that's such a good question. You know, I guess what I would say about what's been most surprising, I mean, I'm not shocked by it, but I'm so pleasantly surprised, is, you know, the reaction that's happened from Mayo Clinic and the physician community. So this whole ecosystem that we're building, and for physicians, as you can imagine, what are the environments that I'm sending, you know, people and patients home to? And how do we really start to think about that? That's been so awesome because there's so much enthusiasm and excitement from Mayo Clinic as a community to our work, and interest in being engaged in the work that we're doing. So I've really been excited about that, and it's helped us accelerate the pace in terms of the collaborations and relationships that we always imagine, but as we know, can take time. I think in the beginning, it's sort of like, well, who's Delos and what do they do and what's building science? And my whole career's been in the, you know, healthcare delivery side. So this is really new for those of us on the healthcare side to start to put the building science pieces together. So that's really been wonderful in terms of the excitement, the enthusiasm, the adoption, and bringing the Mayo Clinic physician community along.
And it really has been spotlighted this year as the lab became, at least in my mind, front and center for Mayo. And I wonder if you could talk about how you pivoted to respond to the COVID era. I don't think that anybody thought that they would have started off their year in the way in which we did. And now you're taking a look at infectious diseases and growing, you know, placebo virus. It's wild. So can you tell us what the pivot has been to address the needs of 2020 and what it's taken from your team?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, for all of us, it's been testing our resiliency for sure, and we're all learning. So, you know, for us, as the challenge of the pandemic was upon us, it was really starting to look around to say, we don't have all the answers, we don't have all the expertise. How do we again start connecting the dots? So doing a very deep dive with Mayo Clinic was very, very important. So how do we start, as you mentioned, reaching out to infectious diseases and virology and molecular medicine and all kinds of, you know, specialties that I've known about in my career, but never quite imagined that we would need those specialties to come together if we were going to play a key important role in thinking about the important research that's going on now in our lab. So doing this deep dive with Mayo is really important. That was exciting because the lab was bringing assets that Mayo Clinic didn't have. And even there, as you mentioned, Paige, you know, the things that have been going on over the last couple of months just kind of are amazing because we have been growing the virus. We can't do that in our own lab because we don't have the level of biological safety set up in our lab, but we can do that in other labs at Mayo Clinic. So the collaboration and the partnership that's going on has been so exciting to say we can grow the virus there, we can bring it here, we can do this. So it's how all the pieces can work together of getting the scientific community connected to see the assets that we can organize. The other really, really big one for us is Mayo Clinic has always encouraged more collaboration with the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota is one of the most prestigious universities in the country, absolutely amazing, and they're really right in our backyard. And so reaching out to the university to say, hey, you know, we have engineers and we have air quality scientists and we have all kinds of smart people, but the depth of aerosol scientists and mechanical engineering and HVAC and all kinds of things, we didn't have that. So it was amazing too, when you just start to ask the question, what we could do in bringing people together. I mean, I'll never forget when we were first starting to frame up what the Well Living Lab could do if we had kind of all these interdependencies organized. We had a workshop with the University of Minnesota and Mayo Clinic, and we did it on a Sunday morning. I think it started at like 8 in the morning and it went on for a few hours. And it just showed kind of the testament and the passion of the people that were engaged and the scientists to come together in ways we never did before. And now we've actually inked our first formal academic collaboration with the University of Minnesota. And it's incredibly exciting with the Department of Mechanical Engineering and the School of Public Health. So it's just making those kinds of connections to accelerate the pace. But thanks for the question.
That's amazing. And that's also your alma mater, yeah?
Yes,
Great.
absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, great people. And it sounds like pulling in even things like the mechanical engineering department, not something you would typically think of when you're trying to tackle these problems. I think that just speaks to the sort of capabilities that you're continuing to add to here. I think of, the lab as from a technology standpoint first, health second, et cetera, but really the lines are blurring. And pulling in expertise from the University of Minnesota and other simulators and laboratories, and doctors to a degree in which I don't think we really ever imagined. The timeliness of this effort here, it sometimes feel like industries like real estate are the slowest moving of them all, but the need is always immediate, and medicine and health is somewhere in between. And it's kind of tricky to line up those timelines. So can you talk a little bit about, I'm going to go back one slide, to some of the research timelines of what you're tackling this year in 2020 and what's going on at the lab and who else you're pulling in to help on some of these?
Absolutely. And I'm not sure who's out there in terms of the slowest industry, because I think the healthcare industry can be very, very slow. I think what's happening now in these new kinds of partnerships, if we can just stay open to the possibility that we can move faster together. So it's really, really exciting. But our work really always starts with what's going on in the literature. So, what's already been done, what do we need to think about doing, and that sort of thing. So that was our first task at hand. And really, we uncovered that a focus in on air and thinking about, the dispersal. I mean, there's so many things about droplets and transmission, and having super smart people like Dr. Chris Hogan, who actually has a lab at the University of Minnesota. He's the editor of the Journal of Aerosol Science. So in addition to all the great things and how smart he and his team are, he's connected to really all of the research that's going on. So when we say, how can the Well Living Lab be part of this, and what can we do that research needs us to do? We don't want to repeat things. We don't want to be competitive. We want to be helpful and additive in our work. So focusing in on air is very, very important, and we have important studies going on that have started. Surface, of course, when we think about just the transmission of the virus, and there's a lot to learn, again, in growing the virus and thinking about common surfaces to our work. And then really behaviors. So we think that air and the surface and the behavior are three of the pillars of things that have to be, further discovered and understood.
That's maybe the hardest part, is that third pillar, the human change and the human behavior. And listening to Dr. Veronique Roger to say that as a cardiologist, the hardest thing to change is not necessarily the human body, but the behavior. And thinking about this year, how tricky that has been. I think that these are spot on, the priorities that help us organize a tasks that's seemingly insurmountable. And I want to repeat something you just said, because I think it's perfect. It's beautiful. It says we can move fast through together. And that is, that's just maybe your key mantra for partnership. I think that's really beautiful. And I would say for Heinz and for us, we're really pleased and privileged to be kind of running alongside you on this one. And I know we've got some engineers, which are maybe not the type of mechanical engineers you think of, helping out on some of this as well. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that expertise that's part of these studies and the fact that they're all going public eventually.
Yes, absolutely. So, right, from the mechanical engineer side. And I'm not sure, Paige, do we have one about the discovery translation application? I just want to share a little bit more about our approach. If we don't have that there, I just want to spend a minute on that one.
But talk over it, please. Yeah.
So please. So the framework that we use in the Well Living Lab, I wasn't sure if that slide was included, but the framework that we use at Mayo Clinic is discovery translation application. So the discoveries can occur in the walls of a lab. but the idea of how do we translate and apply them. So really, it's all about how do we get our discoveries and our innovations out to impact the lives of people. Whether those are, office workers, those are people living in their homes. I mean, there's so many different ways of thinking about impact, but that's really what we're trying to do. So what's been so important, and really want to do a shout out when I think about our relationship with Heinz, because how do we learn up front when we prepare ourselves to think about discovery, translation, application about the environment? So how do we start to think about early on, what don't we know? What don't we know about, HVAC systems and engineers that really spend all of their time thinking about the design of buildings and such? How do we start to prepare our work to move into the field? So it's been really, really helpful. And I want to give a shout out to Heinz because we've been on this journey from the very beginning with Heinz joining our Well Living Lab Alliance as a founding member. And what's been going on in this path to say, how do we move things along the continuum so we're really prepared to make that kind of impact?
And I think, there we are. Some of the other Alliance members that we're joined by, we're really excited about, where it seems like we're all grasping for the answers now. And science takes time. Informed intervention takes time. And I think that you guys have done an incredible job of organizing the innovation here in terms of where the gaps in the research, where can we uniquely help a human as they move throughout their day, and those 3 research aims. I think we're joined by a lot of other Alliance members that are really excited about this. And as you move beyond the 4 walls of the lab, so maybe that leads us, as we're winding down here, to what you're most excited about. What intervention, innovation, or technology are you most excited about going forward?
Thanks for the question. And so I think on this slide here with our Well Living Lab Alliance membership, again, that was back to the idea, if we're going to transform human health and well-being in the indoor environment, we're not going to do that alone. So how do we start looking at partnering models? And you can see what's happened here with our overall ecosystem, with having organizations like Heinz and Panasonic and IBM. And I don't mean to slight anyone with all of these great organizations. And now that we have organizations like Ford and 3M and Noaber, and it's so exciting to see how do we really, again, accelerate the pace together as we're sharing different ideas. But what I would say, I'm excited about lots of things. I think the work we're doing in machine learning, artificial intelligence, our technology, it's all just incredible. The scientists we're bringing into our work, the partnerships I was starting to mention, probably more than anything, I would say, is in the very beginning, our vision was that we would move beyond the walls of the lab with our research. So again, as part of this discovery, translation, application, how do we think about a mobile lab or a field study platform that we can move beyond the walls of the lab? So we have this beautiful 7,500 square foot laboratory in Rochester, Minnesota. We know there's opportunity for intervention and innovation all around the world. And so it's been very exciting because it really starts with a vision and an idea. And I think back to something we talked about in the beginning with my role with innovation. The way I see that is, innovation is really about discovering and executing, discovering and implementing. So, we had that discovery in the beginning and the big vision, but if you don't implement and execute it, is it really innovation? And with the mobile lab, absolutely, it's going to happen. So we've tested it and it's ready to go. So now we can go ahead and take what we're doing in the laboratory, like with our surface and our air and our behavior learnings, and move them closer to the impact on human health. And I want to go all the way back to Heinz because I mentioned just in the journey we've been on, Paige, when I think about the team at Heinz, one of the things we needed to do is we needed to test our platform. Can we actually put sensors somewhere else, and can we take data from a remote location and have via the cloud those data come back to our lab to make sense of them? And we found in the pilot tests we did in the global headquarters with Heinz in Houston, absolutely. So all these things become important when you think about how do you put the pieces together, how do you think about your partnering strategies, and you can't have a go-it-alone strategy. It's not going to work if we have these, big ideas and opportunities. Yeah. So I guess that's what I'd wrap up with.
That's fantastic. And I think we've got a couple more minutes to take one question that is right on this theme, Barb, about
Sure.
the sort of translation piece of this to being taking the science that we're looking at right now and figuring out how do we support the change that we know is needed and the safeguarding that we're all looking to do for the customers that enter our buildings on a daily basis. And I think that the question was, how does HVAC and HVAC systems continue to promote well-being in a post-COVID world? And I think that's exactly what your AIM is looking to do. So briefly, if there's any sort of like parameters you wanted to highlight there with what the parameters of the study that are being done in a simulator and how we're trying to tie that exactly to what an engineer at a building might do to intervene for human health ongoing.
Absolutely. And I think it's exactly that partnership that you're describing. What are we learning? And then how do we connect things together to do further testing? So we tried, and what we built with the Well Living Lab in the very beginning, to have as close to a realistic environment as possible. We know there's certain components of that we need to get out in the real world to be doing some further validation and testing. And this whole idea of the HVAC systems and how the pieces fit together, with smart engineers and such, become a really important part of the conversation. So we tried to be informed in the beginning of doing smart design in our research plans and such. But how do we stay connected with that community as we learn together? And then how do we do validation and further testing to be sure all those pieces are connected together is really important. So I know I'm doing just a high level response, and I don't understand HVAC systems like so many of you, I'm sure, that are part of this conversation. I'm learning a lot, and it's so incredibly important and interesting. And I'm sure in the future, we can do a better job of getting more upstream, even in how it might inform the work that we do in the lab. And I think that's a real sort of call to action as we think about how we connect our communities and our environments together.
Yeah, that's how we, as the built world industry, generally speaking, and the professionals that are here watching today, can help support it. Is consume the information, support the people doing the science, and begin to translate that into our buildings and our interventions there. And then the last thing I wanted to close with is this quote that I just found so compelling is the ability to work yourself out of a job. Accenture earlier this year said something like, every business will be a health business starting in 2020. Every building, every landlord is now a healthcare provider in a way. We support the human habitat, which is a building. So I wonder, I love this, and I wondered if you talked a little about Dr. Mayo and the foundation of the Mayo Clinic and how that applies so well today.
It's just absolutely amazing. And some of these things, you go back to the history books and it's like, wow, Dr. Mayo and his sons were so smart and such visionaries. You think of this over 100 years ago to be, like you said, I mean, this was the profession they were in. They were building the Mayo Clinic and all kinds of things. So it's just amazing to look at the depth of something like this in the thinking. And I think it's exactly what you said. And it's not just, us showing up in our own environments, say, okay, I'm over here in the office, and then I'm going to go home, and then I'm going to be in my car. It's just, how do we think about health? And how do we think about, as people are moving across the continuums and such, how we can help them? We can show up in our own environments and think about how do we optimize those. But I think it's how do we connect these things together that can really have an impact. And we're very, very committed in the lab, and we don't want to sort of hide anything away. Everything's about sharing. So everything we do is driving to a peer-reviewed publication. So we're trying to get everything out there. Our website's a place to learn, and love for this broader community to stay connected to our work through our wellliving.com website, to do a reach out, to join the Well Living Lab Alliance. I think there's a number of ways.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Barb, for sharing with us the ways in which we can support the great work that you're doing. And thank you to CREtech today for allowing us to have this really important conversation. So I hope you all have a great rest of your conference. We'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Paige. Great.
Take care.